Listen, thank you, everyone. Thank you for having me. I can't tell you what a pleasure it is to be out of Washington, to be here in the community, in the industry. Just driving here was just a pleasure. And then just sitting here, only in Texas, can you turn a field house into this elegant dining facility. I was just amazed when I came in here. So well done all of you. And because of where we are, I didn't just prepare a speech to stand up here and talk to you for 15 or 20 minutes. What I thought I would do is really talk to you and try to talk to you about who and what we are, the Maritime Administration, why you all are so important to not only the Maritime Administration but to the nation as a whole, what role you play in our economy, in our national security. And then I was going to do one other thing, but I thought it was a setup because my good friend Admiral Rodriguez told me to come up here and say howdy, so I didn't trust him, and I shouldn't trust him. And my second problem is my slide flipper is a Catholic priest, and 12 years of all-boys Jesuit schools. I'm nervous he's going to find some typos or spelling errors in my slides. But with that said, let's start. If you go to the first slide. I'm a visual guy, so I thought I'd have some pictures for you and stuff. So tonight we're going to talk about the Maritime Administration, what we do, who we are, what we have for assets, current challenges, and something that's probably very near and dear to your hearts, the energy sector and the energy boom that's going on right now, mostly in LNG, and a big challenge that we had with the Jones Act this year. Next slide, please. So we have two primary missions. We have a national security mission and we have a national economy mission. We're going to talk a little bit about each of them. But the first one, the national security mission, not too far from here, you can see it right up in Beaumont. We have a bunch of ships with gray hulls. And those ships are used by the Defense Department in times of national crisis to respond to the military's need to move items, sea lift items, sustain our forces overseas. The other item is the national economy. We are an island nation. Without ships, without this industry that's all around you, that you're all a part of, we could not, our economy would crumble. So it is critically important that we have the ability to do that. An example is, and you're very much a part of this, think about the wintertime. The rest of the country relies on you all for a lot of its fuel, jet fuel from this particular area. Could you imagine if we didn't have the ability to move that to the rest of the nation? Well, it would grind us to a halt, don't you think? So that is why this is a very important part of our government and our economy. Next slide, please. So we just kind of talked a little bit about that. I threw some pictures in, national security. The other portion of our mission is the domestic recovery and relief efforts. You saw recently with the hurricanes that were suffered here and in Puerto Rico, one of the first things to respond are ships. And why is that? Because ships are floating infrastructure. They show up, they have their own fuel, they create their own power. They're a floating hotel, they're a floating hospital. In some cases, they're a floating jail. They're a floating facility for the first responders. So that's a huge part of our mission at MARAD with our ships. And then finally, training and education. The shipping industry, which most of you know, much like the airline industry, if you want to be a pilot, you can't work on a ship unless you have time on a ship. You need the credentials to work on a ship. So how do you get that time? It's the chicken and the egg type scenario. So what we, the Maritime Administration, the federal government do is we support schools like Texas Maritime Academy. We provide them a ship. We provide them funding for maintenance to keep that ship going. We provide them money for fuel and subsistence for the students who decide to take a commitment either in the reserve military and keep their licenses up. Sorry, if that's me, I apologize. So those are the types of things that we do at the Maritime Administration. Next slide, please. I have a budget of a little over $1 billion. It's been growing, which I've been very pleased with. We'll talk about a couple of our new projects that we've gotten extra money for recently. But as you can see, a major portion of my budget is on national security, and that's maintaining a fleet of ships that we'll talk about here in a second to answer the call to the Defense Department when we're asked. Next slide, please. So how are we broken up? We have strategic sea lift, workforce education, transportation and infrastructure and waterways. It's great to have ships, it's good to have mariners, but if you don't have a place to tie the ships up, load them and unload them, then what good are the ships? So that's a critical part of it. And lastly, we have the industrial base. Ships are very unique type things, and the maritime industry is a unique environment to work in. So it's a very specialized industry that needs to be supported, not only to keep our national economy going, but for national security. So then we break everything down into a couple of different subcommittees. Federal sea lift, commercial sea lift, we'll talk about that. Licensed, unlicensed, workforce education. Ports, rivers, canals, locks and dams. Ship construction and repair, fueling and equipment, those types of things. So we have a national security mission with our federal sea lift. Those are those ships that you see up in Beaumont. We use those ships to also do domestic relief and recovery. We talked about that. We also use those ships to help train our mariners. Next slide, please. This is already reserve fleet. You've seen some of these ships, the RRF. We have 46 of those. We have some issues with those we'll talk about in a minute, but all of those ships are on a 5-day status. So what that means is within 5 days, when we get the order from the Defense Department, they are activated and they are ready to go and load at wherever they're going to go and load. So we keep a skeleton crew on them, we keep them maintained and ready, and then we activate them all throughout the year in different exercises to make sure they can do that. So every now and then you'll see them go out and then come right back in the next day. We're just testing the system. That's what we're doing. We have a second fleet called the National Defense Reserve Fleet, which is effectively a whole bunch of ships that we really aren't going to use, the federal government's not going to use anymore, but they're not quite ready to throw out yet. We still use some parts off them. They still have some value to them. And we also, in that fleet of ships, a sub-fleet is our training ship fleet, which the General Rudder that Admiral Rodriguez has down at his school is one from this fleet, and we supply ships to the other state maritime academies as well as Kings Point. Next slide, please. So this is where we're located. This is where we have our ships all over the country. We put them in different places for different reasons, depending on what missions they're gonna perform. But as you can see, we're pretty spread out. We've got field offices all over the place. One of our best ones is right here in Beaumont. Next slide, please. What are the types of ships we have? We have roll-on, roll-off, we have fast sea lift, we have auxiliary crane, aviation maintenance, special mission, heavy lift, and OPODs, which is a ship that's designed to sit 6-7 miles offshore and run pipe to the beach and provide fuel to the services. So think of a damaged or a war zone type situation. You have an undeveloped beachhead and you need to get fuel there for the Marines or the Army or the Navy or whoever is operating there. We can do that and keep the ship out of harm's way by sitting off the beach and pumping it ashore like that. So it's kind of a unique capability. Next slide, please. What are our challenges for that RRF fleet? It's getting old. It's getting old and it's really costly. It's very costly to maintain. It's costly to keep up and going. We're working with the Congress to try and recapitalize that. A lot of many members of Congress agree at how critical these assets are, and so we're trying to get that recapitalized. We have authorization to do it, but we don't have appropriations yet. So we're hoping that will all work out in the next year or so we can start doing some more shipbuilding here in this country. Next slide, please. This is just a silhouette slide of the types of ships, just so you can see. Next slide. These are some pictures. You've seen these. You notice the big ramps on the stern, big heavy-duty ramps for loading military cargo in undeveloped or ports that are damaged. Next slide, please. There's that OPOD system I talked about, and these are just some of the other ships. You can see the one with the helicopter pad for aviation maintenance type activities. Next slide. Okay, so we have our federal fleet, and now we have we also have a commercial fleet. So a lot of ships, 60 ships in the United States that you see going around that have a U.S. flag on them, are actually getting a stipend of money from the United States government to keep that ship with the U.S. flag. And that goes back to those two missions, national security and national economy. If we don't have our own flag and we can't move our own things, then we are not self-sufficient, and that is a vulnerability we don't want to have. So one very cost-effective way to have assets available is to have them out working, making their own money, but have them on call for us. So we provide a stipend of around $5 million a year to these companies per ship, and the deal is they keep it U.S. flagged, it stays U.S. owned, it is crewed by U.S. sailors, and when we call them, they show up. And they move military goods, they move other things for us that we need moved. And we support them additionally by having a program called Cargo Preference. What that means is the Defense Department is constantly moving things all over the globe. So we say, all right, if you're going to move this from here, it has to be on a U.S. flagship. So we give them guaranteed work as well through the Defense Department, through our food aid programs and some other programs that helps them stay in business, because quite honestly, we're just not globally competitive in the shipping industry. And that's not our fault. We have a standard of living here unlike the rest of the world. So we're trying to compete with countries that literally pay less than minimum wage for their employees. We're well past that, so we have to sustain this capability by subsidizing it. So, and then the last and biggest item I have on this slide is the Jones Act, which is what you see a lot around here. You see a lot of tug and barge operations being moved around. You also see a lot of large ships. But the Jones Act is a collection of legislation referred to as the Jones Act that has been in place for almost 100 years, and it simply says three things. I'll boil it down for you. Any piece of cargo moved from one U.S. port to another U.S. port, say I want to move something from Houston to Beaumont, that has to go on a U.S. built ship with U.S. crew, U.S. owned. And that is a law that is in place to maintain our flag, so we can have some, some flag capability for our country. If we didn't do that, then all these shipping companies would register their ships in flags of convenience countries with less taxes. They would pay those substandard wages, and they would try to make as much money as they can. It's a simple fact of how the industry operates. This law prevents that. And it's been a very big challenge this year, because the free economists who are being very successful right now, we have a booming economy, they want to see restrictions like the Jones Act type laws removed so that the free economy can come in. But the economists don't understand the national defense side of it and the national economy side of it, protecting the economy. So it takes the defense guys and the MARAD folks to counterbalance that and keep this in place. And U.S. companies have billions of dollars invested in this. U.S. shipyards, it's what keeps them alive. So we can't let that law down. So we fight to the death for it. And Admiral Rodriguez will shake his head, and he knows exactly what I'm talking about. So, next slide, please. So we have many different types of ships: heavy lift, roll on, roll off, container ships, all those types of assets that we don't pick. MARAD does not pick. The Defense Department tells us, hey, this is what we think you need for this, and this. And then we go out and acquire those assets for them and get them into the program. Next slide, please. It's just some more pictures of the different types of ships. Go ahead. There we go. So the industrial base, ports and waterways. We talked about this a little bit. And I believe Port Arthur is the recipient of a build grant from last year. So we have a few programs. As I mentioned, ships are no good if you can't load them or unload them. So what we try to do in the Department of Transportation is support the expansion and increase the infrastructure and capability of our ports to make them more efficient and more capable. And we do that with a couple of programs, some grant programs, some loan programs. And the build program last year got increased to $1.5 billion. It's not just ports. We had about 11 projects last year for ports. They get a good percentage of it, but it goes towards other stuff, rail and highways and many other projects. But it is a big program that helps places like this. And then we have some other grant programs, infra grants. We have loan programs where port authorities come in and say, hey, we need to borrow some money because we want to put in 2 new cranes, or we want to do this. And we evaluate all of that and we award it as best we can, as quickly as we can, depending on the need and the criticality. And then finally, we handle all of the deep water ports. And we are the first agency to be the agency that in the deep water port process, we physically handle, we're the one government solution. The president has pushed a one government solution. As a builder, he has been frustrated with having to go to the EPA and the different departments to try and get his projects approved. So the Deepwater Ports program is, MARAD is the one-stop shop for the government. You come to us for your license, we help you, we get through it, we deal with the EPA and all the other different agencies, but you work through us. So there's one agency that you work with, and we found that it's becoming very successful, streamlining the process and really helping folks along. And as you all know around here, the energy sector is booming, and our deep water ports, I think we have 11 active applications right now, and it's enormous. Next slide, please. Sorry, I don't have my glasses on. Oh, the industrial base. So, as I said before, ships are very unique. Ports are very unique. All these cranes and things and the different elevators that you see, those are usually one-off type things in some cases. They're made in 1 or 2 different places. So it's an industrial base, a skill set that we have to keep in place in order to keep the system going. So we have a couple of programs like the Small Shipyard Grant Program, where we physically give grants to shipyards and industry that come in and say, hey, I need some money I need to buy a new laser cutter, and if I do that, then I can do this, this, and this. We evaluate their requests, and then we fund them in money. That's a $20 million a year program. It's up from $10 million. 2 years ago it was $10 million, now it's $20 million. So it's been a very successful program. We also have some ship financing programs, a Title 11 program. So a lot of these shipping companies will come in and they'll say, we want to build a ship to do X, Y, and Z, but we can't get long-term financing from the commercial sector, and we, the federal government, guarantee that loan and help them build that ship. Again, they have to build it in a U.S. shipyard usually. It has to be for a certain trade that's going to support our mission. And then research and development. We're just starting this. We have a couple of programs. Our industry, the commercial maritime industry, I'm coming from the defense world, so there's a lot of R&D that's done there. The commercial maritime industry does not. They can't really afford it. They don't have the extra money to really push the envelope on research and development. So that's a role that we feel the government should try and help out with. I have been working this since I took the job. I got permission from the secretary to put my program forward. I'm pretty sure I'm going to have authorization in this coming legislation, and we'll see if I get some appropriations. But I do have a small $3 million a year program to do maritime environmental technical assistance. A lot of regulations are constantly changing around the world when it comes to ballast water and different environmentally related items, and so we can help them with technologies that we try to find for them to help them, or invest in research to try and help them find answers with that program. Next slide, please. Maritime education. We talked about that a little bit earlier with the fact of a chicken and an egg. You can't go work on a ship unless you have a license or a certificate of some sort. You can't get the certificate or the license unless you have time on a ship. So how are you going to get that? You got to get it somehow, and the federal government helps by providing the assets necessary to schools like Texas A&M Maritime Academy and many others. Next slide, please. Let's see. So yes, just what I said. USMMA, United States Merchant Marine Academy, is about 20% of the U.S. Merchant Marine officers that come out each year, and the 6 state academies produce about 75% of them. It's a great balance between the two, and we MARAD run the United States Merchant Marine Academy, and then the next slide, please. The other state schools are run by their states with our support. So they're similar but different, and they're both great assets for getting qualified mariners into our pool. Next slide, please. Well, let's stay there. So if you go back, maybe let's not do that. So there's California, Massachusetts, Maine, Michigan or Great Lakes, Texas, and New York. Those are the states that support maritime schools. Next slide. So I want to play a video for you. So one of our biggest programs that we just got funded for in the 18 budget, part of the omnibus negotiations, and I don't know if you remember this, when the government was negotiating the budget, one of the items that helped to bring it together was a new training ship. So all of the schools need these training ships, and the ones that we have, as I mentioned, are very old. So there's been an effort by all of the state maritime academies. They came together and they've been lobbying Congress and working with us to try and develop a program. It's called the National Security Multi-Mission Vessel. And rather than me talk about it, I've got a video, 6-minute video for you to see. So what else I was going to talk about is I was going to talk about specifically about LNG, because that seems to be probably a pretty relevant issue here for you all. As you all know, I saw the slides that were showing up before. We are now a net exporter of our energy products, and LNG is one of the big ones. And LNG is going to grow and be a very significant player in the future, not only for our own power plants and our own industries, but for foreign industries. Ships coming to our shores are going to need LNG. They're already being built. We already have some in our fleet. So there's a big push right now to make sure we have all the capabilities for LNG. But we don't. We have zero, not a single flagged U.S. LNG carrying vessel. And that is a dangerous place to be, because everybody's screaming for LNG, and we, the United States, do not have a way to move it ourselves. So the real free economists pushed really hard, starting in December, to get the president to waive the Jones Act, that piece of law I talked about earlier, to allow foreign countries, foreign-owned ships, foreign-built, foreign-crewed, to come in and move LNG around our nation. So, as you can imagine, we fought very hard, and it was a fight that finally required 7 senators to go into the Oval Office and tell the president, we cannot do this. He agreed, and so he did not waive it. The LNG in this country is moved around by pipeline, mostly all by pipeline. The exports that go on from here are going to Asia and other places around the world. There's actually not a huge market yet for moving LNG by ship, or at least large volumes of it. The bunkering market will come together here very soon. We're already seeing that happening. In fact, Conrad Industries, I don't know if anyone's here from Conrad, but right down the street, built the first LNG barge made in the United States, Jones Act compliant, and that barge is sitting in Jacksonville right now, fueling ships that Tote and Crowley Maritime built to service the Puerto Rico market. So that market is emerging, and it is going to continue to grow. Cruise ships are all investing in LNG-powered ships. And everybody's doing it because of a 2020 IMO regulation that is an emissions regulation, and the only way they can meet that requirement is either by burning a very low sulfur fuel, which is very expensive and hard to find, switching to LNG, or installing scrubbers. I don't mean to get technical, I'm just kind of giving you the background of this. Oh, here we are, good. We're trying to stimulate that. We're trying to get some U.S. investment in LNG carriers, because there are 2 markets right now that need it. Massachusetts or New England needs it in the wintertime, Well, they really need it all year long, and Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is still repairing from their hurricane. They don't have the capability yet, but they want to switch to mostly all LNG fuel for their power plants. But we have no way of getting the LNG from Sabine Pass to Puerto Rico legally with the Jones, because Puerto Rico is part of the United States, so that falls in the Jones Act. So Puerto Rico filed a 10-year blanket waiver request from the governor to the government, our government, asking for the Jones Act to be released. Now, most people say, hey, let's do anything we can to help Puerto Rico, and we want to do that, but we cannot sacrifice. If we allow the Jones Act to be cracked like that, we will never gain that market back. Once we lose that to foreign competition, we will not get it back. The shipbuilders will not develop the technology to build the LNG type ships. We will be lost forever. So we are fighting that very hard, and we have some solutions in place. We have some waivers in place that we're going to allow, limited waivers. We're going to allow ships that weren't built in the United States to reflag to the United States, put U.S. crews on them, U.S. owned, and we'll allow that to happen from a certain date back. That is probably the best scenario, because we need the capability now. Massachusetts, if you all maybe weren't aware of it, but 2 years ago, Massachusetts was buying some LNG from the spot market, and they bought a bunch of batches from Russia. As you can imagine, that does not sit well with our president. He does not want to see us dependent on Russia for anything, or China for that matter. So it's been a big push in the White House to come up with a solution, and it's something I've been working on since December, almost every day. And we have a solution that is very close to coming together. We hope that we're going to see a couple of U.S. ships reflagged into the industry here very soon. And believe it or not, that solution is coming right from here. Houston, it's a Houston-based company that is providing that solution. And we're this close. So I hope that we will have an announcement soon that we've got that taken care of. But it's been a big fight and a very serious, significant issue for us in the maritime industry. On the top left, that's the barge that was built here in Texas. It's the first LNG capable U.S. flagged, U.S. Jones Act compliant barge called, I think, Clean Jacksonville, and it is up in Jacksonville doing what it was designed to do. A VT Halter in Mississippi is building two ATB-style LNG carriers, and they're going to come online in 2020 and 2021. Up in the far right are 3 ships that were built in the early 80s, late 70s, actually, ironically, built in Massachusetts. They are Jones Act compliant, but right now they are flagged in the Marshall Islands, and they're sitting in storage. And there is statutes on the books to allow those to come back into service and do the trade of LNG domestically for us. And then finally, Crowley Maritime out of in Jacksonville found a very unique way to get LNG to Puerto Rico by putting it in ISO containers, which, oh, by the way, are made right here in Texas. So that's another good thing. And that's really all I had to say on LNG. I don't know if I think that's all the slides I have. Next slide. That's it. I'm happy if we want to try to do some questions, I'm happy to try to answer and help, but that's my presentation. Sorry the sound didn't work. Thank you.